Now, Ian, I hear you've been off doing the hard work for us, reading climate reports so that the rest of us don't have to. There were two reports you listed in your article: the State of the Climate 2023 by the Ole Humlum, I hope I got that right, and the Wyoming Climate Report by the CO2 Coalition. And even that makes me want to reach for a glass of red. Why did you torture yourself? What were these reports about, and why were you reading them?
Well, there are 140 pages altogether. I read them to keep up to date. I read them to see what people right across the spectrum are writing about and are thinking. Unlike the other side, I do read everything, and I find it quite interesting. And I try to share that interest with specky readers.
Well, one of the, you had a whole list of findings that you had from reading these articles, and one of them was, and I'm just going to quote part of it here, it was about data for the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, POD, extending back to 1854. It is in phase with the global temperature changes and tied to the sea surface temperature in the planet's largest ocean. Now, this was basically about surface temperature and global air temperature, and it ends up saying the changes in the PDO are unrelated to atmospheric CO2. Why was that of interest to you? Can you explain to our readers where you were going with that observation?
Yes, that's of interest because the ocean exchanges heat with the atmosphere. And the ocean gets most of its heat, not all of it, but most of its heat in the top few metres, which comes from sunlight. And so if you get changes in ocean surface temperature, that's telling you something's happening with the sun. That's unrelated to carbon dioxide. So we've had a cold period from about 1945 to 1975 when the Pacific Decadal Oscillation was negative. So we had a temperature decrease in the surface temperature of the oceans, and that meant that there was less heat to be transferred to the atmosphere, and so it was cooler. Now, the air doesn't hold much heat. It is water that holds heat. It's got a very, very high capacity to hold heat. So when we see times of the warm oceans, that's the top of the ocean, we have warm weather. We had a warm period between 1977 and 1998, and that was when the Pacific Decadal Oscillation was positive. So the temperature had slightly increased on the surface of the oceans, and that heat was transferred to the air. Now, we can measure that. Now, what we see when we plot carbon dioxide is that it continues to rise. Yet we have global temperatures rise and fall, and these are related to ocean temperatures. So clearly there's no relationship between atmospheric carbon dioxide and the temperature of the atmosphere. And we've known that for a very, very long period of time. But this Global Warming Policy Foundation summary of the climate basically confirms what we already know. And what this report gave were measurements. They didn't give any models at all. Very little interpretation, just measurements. Here are the measurements, work it out for yourself. And that's the way science ought to work.